While we wait for the Cooperative Governance Minister to announce the funds that will be released to those provinces the worst affected by flooding and heavy rainfall, let's bring this discussion now. The Financial Sector Conduct Authority has just released its Complaint Management Industry Review Report. Now, essentially what it does is it reveals that most consumer complaints lie in the insurance and the retirement industry. Let's unpack it further with our business reporter, Ntokozo Khumalo, who attended a roundtable meeting where these findings were announced. Ntokozo, great to see you. So, if I understand correctly, the findings tell us that there's actually quite a small percentage of us that have complained, particularly in these two industries, insurance and retirement. The sample size you were telling me is just under 12,000, and 8% of those 12,000 had complaints. Does that add up for you?
Well, it didn't quite add up for me, but I'll give it to the FSCA that this is the first report of its kind that they're doing looking into complaints within those sectors. They did release earlier on one specifically into the banking sector. So the sample size here, 11,600 people, mostly Black Africans between the ages of 25 and 54. And from that sample size, finding that only 8% actually lodged complaints between the period of 2021 and 2023. Most of those complaints within the insurance and retirement industry. So it was before the whole two-part retirement system, so we weren't able to get, an indication of whether it was in regards to that. But those two industries, the ones that are clearly problematic, and I think where the disconnect was for me is this report was done in two phases. So the first phase between March and December 2022, speaking to industry, getting that information from industry on the largest complaints that they receive. In the following year, then, FSCA speaking to consumers via that online survey. So there is a bit of disconnect in terms of what industry thinks they're doing to be able to manage consumer complaints and what consumers themselves are saying. So what was interesting is a large percentage, about, half, just over half, didn't even know of the procedure to take when wanting to lodge a complaint with the institution themselves. So a lot of consumers going directly to the ombudsman. So the findings showing that they're having to then send back those complaints to the financial institutions, consumers saying that there isn't a, clear process on exactly what steps their complaints will go through, when it will be escalated, don't get feedback when issues are being escalated, and also the time that it takes for the company to get back to the consumer. A little bit of discrepancy there. Institutions saying they're responding a lot faster, whereas 31% of the respondents saying that it takes between a week to a month before they hear back from institutions on their complaints.
So you said it was in 2022, right, between March and December. That would have been sort of on the back of COVID-19, towards the tail end of COVID-19. Would I be correct in assuming that many of the complaints would have focused around sort of COVID and pandemic-related issues?
Well, it didn't give a clear indication, the report, but we did pose that question. And of course, that is when people were coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, trying to rebuild on life again. So some of those complaints related to that, but it's mostly around the access to information, Michelle. So whatever period it is, it doesn't seem that the COVID-19 pandemic being the biggest problem, because the biggest issue really is people even knowing how to lodge the complaints in the first place. So it's not something going wrong with my fund or something, money's being taken out of my account. It's issues of saying, if I have something that I don't understand, a product that was sold to me and wasn't clearly explained to me, the biggest complaint is people just not knowing where to even go to lodge that complaint. And then going to the ombudsman that actually ends up eating a lot of the time and giving up on the complaints, because then the ombudsman simply sets them back to the financial institution. So about, I think it was 67%, I just want to get that note, but yes, 67% of the respondents dissatisfied with the complaints process. So not even knowing who do I talk to? Do I speak to the call center agents? Will they send me to the right department that is specific to this issue? So the complaints issues largely being around that. And then, the next issue being that once they have lodged a complaint with the financial institutions, and this has happened to me a couple of times, you lodge a complaint with the bank and then you get a call from a totally different department from what you were actually complaining about. So that being some of the issues that consumers are increasingly getting frustrated on. So not necessarily the product itself, but knowing how to go about getting that complaint resolved and lodged in the first place.
Yeah, I think suffice to say all of us have probably been in a position where we've just needed more information.
Yeah.
And we don't know where to go. It's ironic, isn't it, that it's the complaint system itself that people are complaining about.
Yeah.
So this is a message now to industry players to simplify that process. Not all of us are on the internet. We're not able to just access information freely. How do we make it incredibly easy and streamlined for someone to just pick up the phone, for them to be directed to the right department and to get the answers they need?
Well, those are some of the recommendations made by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. How fast the institutions actually start implementing is another question, because it did outline that as it was conducting the investigations and collecting the information, it was simultaneously giving feedback to industry on what can be done. So some of those issues saying uniformity needed across the board. While institutions might have different ways of dealing with complaints, having some sort of uniformity would assist, systematically dealing with those complaints. Each organization having to have a system where customers are very clear to say, my first call of action is to call the call center. I know from the call center it will go to a senior manager. And that was also another issue that was highlighted. More senior management and more senior staff within the institutions needed to deal with complaints. Just too many junior staff that are allegedly the ones dealing with complaints, which then deals with that mess of saying it's not recorded correctly or channeled correctly. So the FSCA is suggesting that more senior managements are needed at these institutions to deal with these complaints, but also a clear service level agreements with third-party organizations. You might think you are only complaining with your bank, but the bank might need to go back to other service providers who need to give them feedback on the next step. So it's a layered issue, Michelle. So you are waiting to hear back from the bank waiting to hear back from third parties, which then just prolongs that complaints process. But I think that uniformity and that systematic, process of dealing with complaints, one of the things that came out as recommendations from the body.
I mean, I'm sure our viewers would have experience with this, and you've said that you have as well. Do you find that when you do have a query and you go onto whatever your financial service provider is, you go onto the website, it's almost hidden?
Yeah.
The place where you are meant to get help on who do I call, how do I... You kind of have to dig through the website to find the number.
Absolutely. And that's why I think we need to dig into the 8% of people that are complaining, because it also raises the question of how many people just gave up in the process. Because I know I've had a few complaints where you just give up because the process of putting that complaint is so tedious. And it's exactly points to that access of information, because 53% of those respondents, those 11,000 respondents, saying it's not easy to get information. So why the institution say, go on our websites, all the steps are there, it's not easy to work through those steps. And as you said, not everyone has easy access to data or information such as that. A lot of people still going inside the institution to get the information, as opposed to being able to work through a website and being able to know what process, what code do you dial, what number do you dial. So institutions needing to focus then on just making that access to information a lot more easier to understand for consumers.
I suppose I'll be pushing it if I ask you about the companies who might have been maybe the worst at handling complaints. Did that come up? Did any names come up?
It did not come out. We did ask that question. They pointed to this being their first of such reports. For the banking sector reports, we did get an idea of who was, surveyed there. Over 200 banks, a lot of them international financial institutions, but a lot of the big 5 banks were surveyed. In this, for the insurance and the retirement funds, it would be the large players such as your Discovery, your Outsurance, but they did not quite specify who were the ones who were the biggest culprits quite yet. Perhaps in the next report, Michelle will get those details.
Yeah, absolutely. Ntokozo Khumalo, a pleasure having you in studio. Thanks for giving us what is an incredibly important and I think timeous report. Hopefully the next one will have a lot more detail in there, but I'm sure you've had experience with trying to speak to your financial service